I'm Philip Walker, director of the Annette and Irwin Eskind Family Biomedical Library and Learning Center, which is a part of Vanderbilt University Libraries. And I've been here about 7 years and director for 1 year.
Well, welcome to Vanderbilt Library's Poetry Room.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk about book love, and I'll ask you a few questions after our intro. Author Laura Miller writes that the first book we fall in love with shapes us every bit as much as the first person we fall in love with. This kind of emotional attachment can also affect choices we make as an adult. Can you tell us what the first book you fell in love with was, Philip?
Well, I don't know if there's a first book I fell in love with. My childhood was based on magazines and World Book encyclopedias. We had National Geographic, Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, Popular Mechanics, and Discover magazine. But as for a book per se, I think it's the World Book encyclopedias, and I vividly remember my grandmother's white and green set, which I think was from the 70s, and we had a very nice set. It was navy blue with gold writing, and I think was published in the 80s, and that was my introduction to reading, and probably why I'm more prone to nonfiction than any other type of reading material. But, yeah.
What made the encyclopedia special to you?
It was just a pursuit of knowledge and just so much out there. I mean, it's the same with National Geographic. I mean, you're talking about before the internet, this was your exposure to the world, in addition to PBS. But it was just fascinating to know that there was just so much out there, and I was taught early about the value of reading and that everything's not going to come from a classroom. So it was just that self-sufficiency and motivation for reading in general.
Have you reread the encyclopedias at all?
I don't know if they exist anymore, but but occasionally I find myself online looking at Encyclopedia Britannica, and there's a ton of sources out there related to just encyclopedic materials that I still refer to. And especially now when we have clinical topics, sometimes you just need to find that basic material to understand it before you do any searching.
Was there a book that captured your imagination as a reader before college?
There was, and I can't say I had the greatest English education through secondary schooling, but I was really intrigued by the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And it was, I would honestly say through schooling, it was maybe the only book that I read cover to cover as opposed to just reading the assigned pages. And it's captivated me as a 15-year-old, and it still captivates me as an adult. I've read it maybe 2 or 3 times and even pursued additional information about Malcolm X. And the nice thing that I've learned over time is, I mean, he's been analyzed through political history, United States history, African American history, religious history. His oratory skills have even been studied and analyzed. But I think, even as a 15-year-old and with rereading it as an adult, I still look at it from a psychological perspective and just a developmental perspective, because there's so much transformation involved, and that transformation becomes through education and exposure to different persons throughout his lifetime. And that is something I think we can all relate to, even though Malcolm X is considered a polarizing figure, but at the same time, when you look at it from different eyes, different lenses, and that's what really drew to me, was this psychological aspect of his life. And I'm sure you can go to any bookstore and library and find thousands of books that talks about people's stories and their various changes. But I just saw where being exposed to so many different people and knowledge, that he not only transformed, but maybe possibly even evolved as a person as well as a figure. And that's just something that's been I think a part of my life and a part of my persona, and possibly some of the way I present when I am speaking. Is just, I think a lot of that comes through that one book that I read 3 decades ago. Yeah.
Is there a book that set you on your professional path?
Oh yeah, without question, Mountains Beyond Mountains. It's I think it's Kidder, Kidder, and it's a book written about Paul Farmer, who I happened to hear speaking at Tulane University when I was a brand new medical librarian in 2005. And so Paul Farmer he's the founder of a group called Partners in Health, and they do phenomenal work around the globe, primarily Russia, Haiti, and Peru, I believe, dealing with HIV/AIDS as well as TB. And it's just funded by philanthropic organizations, but do a lot of work around the world. And you'll see just such a can-do spirit in what we think about the true essence of health. And throughout the book and throughout his other works, you'll see how health is impacted by geography and environment and politics, of course, money, and then just sustainability and resource capability within these countries. And it's just been, I think, the one thing that drew me as this new librarian, and to really understand the value of health and the value of that information. I mean, yes, you need people for health, but people also need information. And that's how I saw my role as a medical librarian. And when I look back, I also think of how important it's been, having worked with several people in public health and global health and international health, of how valuable the open access movement is going to be and is to people in low resource countries, or low income countries as they're called. And it's really that one book I can say set the stage for me professionally as to who I would be and how I saw the value of information in health, not only within my institution, but also just internationally.
Is there a book that influences you now in your work?
Oh, ooh, way too many. And that's partly because of so many interesting faculty I've met at several institutions. And just, people like to make fun that librarians read all day, but it's amazing when you visit some of these faculty how many books they have in their offices. And not that I want them in my library when they leave. But there have been a lot of books I can say over the last probably 8 years that I have read, and they really fit into two categories. Almost, if you think of a kind of a thematic book quest I've had. And I've started with a lot of books like The Art of War, The Book of Five Rings, things related to management and strategy and leadership, even delved into some of the samurai books, the Bushido, the Code of the Samurai, and just things that kind of set the stage as who I am as an employee. It's about struggle, sacrifice, honor, loyalty, and discipline. So I think a lot of that's kind of set me up as to who I am as a person and who I am as a professional librarian as well. But also, I think over the last 5 years, what has happened, my second theme has been, and also related to the first theme, I'm sorry. I came across a book by Roland Marullo in the East Asian section of Barnes & Noble. And there was a book called Breakfast with Buddha, and he also has Lunch with Buddha and Dinner with Buddha. But I think my favorite of all his books is Golfing with God. And it's a lot about our personal journeys and just things that we don't either see or things we take for granted. And it's really a lighthearted book, and it covers many religions. And so it's a retired golfer who has actually passed. So he's in heaven, and he's called upon to a higher level of heaven to assist God with his golf game. So it is a very lighthearted book, but really it is, I think, one of the most profound books I've read in a long time. And it's something that is not, you would not think that you were really reading a book about spirituality, but you are. And it's really a wonderful book. And I think he has some other books related to poetry, but those 4 books all related to spirituality, and they're really good books. But my next quest probably last 5 or 6 years, and since I started here at Vanderbilt, has gone more the management and leadership. Even before I had administrative aspirations, I guess I could just see that subconsciously where it was going. And this also had to do with a lot of the faculty meetings. And it's just been, I mean, everything from Collins is Good to Great, Iconoclast, which is written by neuroscientists on how we think differently. It's of course Steve Jobs and et cetera, and just some of those people who just really take things, they become the innovators and really the trendsetters. Adam Grant's Give and Take, about how helping people helps us with success. Newport's Deep Work, there's Adam Grant's Originals. I think almost my two books that have come across, which I think are similar to my life story, have been Duckworth's Grit, which is about passion and perseverance. And I think that's been my true life story, because of what I've been able to do, at least what I feel I've been able to do as a librarian, has been really based upon grit. And a recent book I purchased was Range. I can't remember the author, but it just came out in May. And it's about how generalists succeed in the world run by specialists. And that's just been perfect, because as a librarian, I feel I have to know so much. It's almost a curse that it's really difficult to specialize in something if you'd like to, because of the need to be such a global type person in this profession and this environment. So those books, somewhere between 8 to 10 of them, have been very influential in what I've been at least wanting to accomplish, and just the feelings within as here at Vanderbilt. And I think my former director introduced me to a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And it's actually about, and it seems to be pretty prevalent on campus too, where it's about creating your own markets. And I think of that as a librarian, and I think about that as part of the Eskind Biomedical and legacy, is of how you really think about what librarianship is in a clinical context, and as well as the research context. And not that you can always create a different market, but at least what are we doing and how do we do it differently? How do we do it in a better way? How do we really make information applicable to the clinical providers here? Because there's so much out there, but at the same time, is knowledge translation a part of what we do, as opposed to just supporting publishing? We want to make sure what we're doing has some sort of continuation and dissemination to be impactful. And so you think about, I guess some people would think, well, the Blue Ocean Strategy it makes you, arrogant and things like that. But I think it allows you to see a need, and it also helps you, at least with our department, I feel it creates that value and that impact, because some institutions, you may be okay with being a standard librarian, a standard information professional, but there are some institutions where you just have to evolve and innovate just as your institution does. And many of those books give you that mindset of how some institutions become the way they are. And it's obviously because of some of the reading that people are doing here.
Thank you. Is there a book you like to share with friends and family and coworkers?
Well, most of the time I'm just passing along books that are part of the library and part of the profession, and making sure that, especially a lot of my informationists are up on materials related to healthcare delivery, research methods. That's one book I've probably passed around a lot, understanding research methods in health. But family-wise, I can't say. I have a part of the library in the study. I guess that's just it stays with Dad, even though it doesn't say don't touch. But there's just a lot of books that, I guess they're just mine. Both of my children have also read Alex Haley's book about autobiography, but we have varying taste in the household, and they're there for everyone to read, but they are there.
Can you tell me about a gift book you remember?
Actually, the last book I received, because of course, my family will tell you that I don't know what to buy for that. But the last book I received, I'm probably going to ruin this pronunciation, but I think it's Ikigai, Ikigai. And the author studied centenarians around the world, mostly in Japan, but I also think a few in America and Italy. And this concept of Ikigai is about, it's also about purpose. So it kind of takes me back to my original book, my earlier book quest. And the mission, friendships, purpose in life, but also maintaining a mental activity and a physical activity level. I mean, many of the people they interviewed, all the way up 117 years old, and they talk about they've never retired, even though they're not doing formal work, but whether it's gardening, it's fishing, it's anything that they're still doing in life just to make sure that they're still active. And my daughter gave me that book because understanding, well, maybe a third of the library is related to this sort of purpose and spirituality. And I've just finished that book, and that's an accomplishment when I can say I finished a book. And there's just some of those that grab you, and you can always think, well, there's just not enough time, but there are just some books that do grab you from end to end. And whether it's the airplane, the airport, the doctor's visit, there are just going to be times when that book is just glued to you. And it's always in your bag, it's always under your car seat. And that was one of those books. And it's a small book, but at the same time, it was something that just grabbed your attention. And in addition, there's also, they talk about food. And of course, the quote, "Let your food be medicine." And there's a lot of things in there related to healthy eating, in addition to its effect on our mind and our bodies and our spirits. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Philip. It's great to hear about all the books you love.
You're welcome. You're quite welcome.